I want to share with you an incident that happened a while back. A man dies, and he goes to the pearly gates, and on watch that particular day is St. Peter. And St. Peter says, I can't let you in until you share with me an act of courage. The man thinks about it. I guess I've done something courageous. I can think of one thing. And so he talks about how there was once a group of bikers who were tormenting a woman, and they were badgering her, and they were pushing her around, and he stood up. For the first time in his life, he stood up, and he was no longer a coward, and he confronted them, and he went to the meanest-looking biker, and he slapped him in the head, and he pulled out his nose ring, and he said, "Leave this woman alone." St. Peter said, "That is pretty impressive. Wow, not too many people would stand up to such a biker gang." He said, "Exactly when did this happen?" The guy says, "About 10 minutes ago." Right? Courage, right? Courage is difficult. Courage is dangerous. Courage can get you killed, and it can get you killed, right? But if it couldn't do all those things, then it wouldn't be courage. We need those things to have courage. You have to have something to overcome for it to be courageous. Courage, definition in the dictionary: the quality of mind or spirit that enables a person to face difficulty, danger, pain without fear and having bravery. Or in Hebrew we call it amidst. I really love that term, amidst, to strengthen, right, one's heart. That's what courage is, to strengthen one's heart, one's resolve. Nothing to do with physicality, not with strengthening muscles, but one's inner resolve, one's heart. And there are all kinds of amazing stories of courage, and we need them. I am a huge fan of watching movies about real-life movies and reading stories, real-life stories, and hearing tales about people who act with courage. Because I believe as a society, as a race, a human race, we need these examples to build our ideals around, to build our lives around. They're incredibly important. We studied about some last week with Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and some mythical ones as well in the Torah, right, with the great women of the Exodus. So with that being said, there's a tragedy. And a tragedy isn't just when physical things, bad things happen to good people. Also, there's a tragedy in our world when we have the opposite of heroic deeds and actions, when we have cowardly deeds, cowardly actions. There's ramifications upon our psyche as individuals, as our psyche as a community, as a society. This past week, I know all of you have seen the images and the pictures, as have I, over and over again on the television set or on the internet, of that ship that ran aground, right, just outside of Italy. And it's hard to get that image out of your head, isn't it? Something about the human, man-made creation of a ship on its side, just so unnatural. It's hard for our brain to process that, to see it, a massive ship on its side, juxtaposed against the beauty of nature. Something really jarring about it. I don't know about you, but it's really stuck in my mind. Whose kid is that? Oh, that's mine, sorry. So there's something etched upon it in my mind. And I was thinking about the words, a great television show, which is no longer in the air. I loved it. It was called The Unit. If you didn't see The Unit, it was a great show. But there's one scene, I love The Unit. There's one scene where one of the guys in there talks about a helicopter. And he describes it, and I never thought about it. He said, what is a helicopter? It's like 1,000 moving parts whose sole purpose, once it comes off the conveyor belt, is to kill us. Right? I mean, if you think about it, it's not natural for a helicopter and all this metal to get up into the air, and the entire time it's trying to be pulled down by gravity, right? Or a ship on the ocean. And when these things crash and run aground, whether it's human error or machine error, it's a tragedy, it is. But nothing compares to the tragedy of what happens afterwards, when people don't rise to the occasion. And that's what was hard to watch this past week. Of course, the loss of human life is impossible to bear witness to, but the way the passengers reacted, many of them, not all of them, of course, but some of the accounts, it really is hard for the soul to feel. I heard about men who pushed pregnant women aside to get out the exit door, right, to save themselves. I read about one woman who tried to grab the life jacket off of another woman to save herself. I read about parents or adults who trampled little children to get to freedom, to get to safety. Now, we can't judge them. I mean, these are civilians, these are passengers. It was chaos. Most of us will never, God willing, have to know what that kind of chaos is like. But the one person we must judge is the captain. The captain has to be held to a different standard, must be held by a legal court, but also by the realm of the moral court, of the spiritual court. If that captain is not held to a higher standard, held accountable for what he did, I believe we lose something profound in our lives. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about the words of Theodore Rothko, who wrote, "What is madness, right? What is madness but nobility of the soul at odds with circumstances?" Let me say it again. What is madness? The nobility of the soul. Everybody at some core level has a neshama tahara, a noble, pure soul. And yet sometimes circumstances and the soul's nobility are at odds. And that is madness. And that is chaos. And ultimately, that is tragedy. And it is tragedy, right, when people don't stand up and do what is right. This captain, as you all know, not only did he abandon ship, right, which is, to me, it's almost a secular commandment. I mean, think if you can have a commandment in the secular world, isn't one of them that the captain goes down with his ship? It's just something, it's like a mantra. It's like a core value, not even just as Americans, but in maritime law. There's actually a maritime law. The captain must be the last one to leave. There's just something primal about it. A captain must go down with his or her ship. This man not only abandoned ship, I'm sure you heard the transcripts between him and the Coast Guard, thank you. Back and forth. It was just unbelievably the degradation of what he was doing and saying and representing as a captain, quote-unquote captain. He is in violation of so many laws, both man-made and moral. And we must address it. We must face it. The truth of the matter is it's not new. These issues are not new. These are human issues. These have been around since the beginning of time, the beginning of humanity. You look at our Torah. I think one of the reasons why we read the Torah is to learn what not to do. And it's a pretty amazing thing that the Jewish people, that our rabbis would canonize a text that's flawed, right? It's one of the only religious texts to canonize the flaws, not just the shining moments. So why do we read Adam and Eve? I believe it's to teach us how to not abandon ship. Because look at what Adam and Eve do. They run ashore, right? They make a mistake. And God comes calling. And what does God say to them? Ayeka, where are you? And what's their response? Remember, Adam says, I didn't do it. He abandoned ship, right? She did it, pointing to putting the blame on Eve. And Eve says, I didn't do it, right? He did it. The snake did it. She abandoned ship. And everybody's running from owning their role, owning their voice, standing their ground. It's a very pathetic moment. And I think we read this to remind us how not to respond. And then we keep reading about men and women who become greater and greater and greater still. And you have some great men and women in the book of Genesis. Don't get me wrong. I don't think they compare to this week's Torah portion, Moses. You look at Abraham. Look, Abraham's a visionary. I mean, how could he not be great? And Isaac is like a made man. Isaac is born to Abraham. Of course, he's going to be great. Jacob is just filled with this passion and this desire. Of course, he's going to do great things. Joseph, he's arrogant, but he's also confident, self-assured. He's going to do great things. Moses is the most interesting. Last week we met a man who was not a visionary, who was not self-assured, who was not confident, who was not passionate, right? God comes calling to him last week's Torah portion and says, Vayidaber Moshe ken el bnei Yisrael. Moses spoke thus. Actually, let me back up here. I skipped over it. First time I've ever printed on the back side by accident. Here we go. God calls, V'ata lecha v'eshlachecha el paro v'hotzei et ami b'nei Yisrael mimitrayim. God called upon Moses and said, go to my people, to the children of Israel, and lead them out of Egypt. So you think it would be pretty clear, right? God calls to Moses, says, let my people go, take them from Egypt to Israel. And what is Moses' response? Nope, can't do it. Vayomer Moshe el Elohim, mi anochi. Who am I? I am nothing. I can't do this. God calls to him and says, maybe you didn't hear me. Maybe you misunderstood me. It wasn't really a question. It was a command. And what is Moses' response? V'ya'an Moshe, and he answers, Vayomer v'hen, lo ya'aminu li, v'lo yishma'u b'koli. He's right. They won't believe me. They won't listen to me. And God says yet again last week's Torah portion, a third time, Moses, you probably are just missing the point here. Go to the Israelites. And what is Moses' final response last week? Vayomer Moshe el Adonai, Bi'adoni lo ish dvarim anochi. Right? I'm not a man of speech. I'm heavy-tongued. I can't speak. I have a stutter, the rabbis say. I'm not the right guy for the job. Moses turns God down 3 times last week. Now, if that were where it ended, he wouldn't be a great man. We wouldn't revere this man. Why do we revere Moses? Not because he's Charlton Heston, right? Whoever cast that did not study Torah. Charlton Heston as Moses should have been like Woody Allen at the beginning. You hear this, I can't do it. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not good enough. What are they going to think? They're not going to believe me. Who am I? Charlton Heston on a good day. Actually, he becomes Charlton Heston. But at first he is Woody Allen because he's filled with this doubt and this anxiety and this inability to rise to the occasion. And yet this week's Torah portion, what do we read about? We read about Moses stepping up. Right? We read about Moses heeding the call. We read about Moses overcoming his fear. It was Eddie Rickenbacker, World War I hero, became a coach later on, who said, courage is doing what you're afraid to do. There can be no courage unless you are afraid. Why do we revere Moses? Not because he's fearless, but because he's fearful and he overcomes those fears. That's what makes a man or a woman great. We wouldn't expect any captain of any ship that is going down to be fearless. Of course one is going to be fearful, but to be a captain of a ship means you stand your ground and overcome the fearfulness and do what you have to do, right? To lead these people from Egypt to Israel, whatever the geography you're talking about might be. And this is what it takes to be a true leader. And there are true leaders, and there are examples of greatness, right? We cannot allow this captain of that sinking ship to inform the way we look at the world, to inform the way our children look at the world. And these kids need heroes, by the way, now more than ever. When I was growing up, you watch television, you watch movies, it was pretty clear. The bad guys versus the good guys, right? Star Wars and Superman and superheroes. It was black and white. Today, watch television shows, watch movies. It's far more ambiguous, far more complicated of who's the hero and who's the villain. Play some of their video games. I love playing them, but it's not always clear who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. It's more fun to be the terrorists in some of their games than it is to be the counter-terrorists. That's a real problem when you're talking about informing the psyche of a child. There's true stories of heroism. In World War II, this is a true story. It's called The Four Chaplains. There was a ship called the USS Dorchester, and it set sail, I believe it was early February 1944, I believe, and it was taking a bunch of young men to go fight over in Europe, and they had set sail, and they were hit by a U-boat, a German U-boat, right off the coast of Greenland, I believe. And the ship was starting to go down. And the men were underneath in the hold, crammed in, and they were panicking. Many of them were killed on impact. But the rest of them were panicking, scrambling to get out. Who led the way? Who saved these men? 4 chaplains, Reverend Fox, Rabbi Good, Reverend Poling, and Father Washington. There is account after account after account of what these chaplains did. They calmed the men. They brought order to the chaos. There was one example a man told about after he survived, how it was frigid, it was freezing, and he was trying to help other men, but he couldn't feel his hands anymore. Rabbi Good took his gloves and gave them to the man. The man said, Rabbi, I can't take your gloves. And Rabbi said, I have an extra pair. And in retrospect, the man was talking about later, there's no way the rabbi could have had an extra pair. It was not possible. It goes on to talk about how the men up above deck, once they all got out, were scrambling to get onto the lifeboats, and there weren't enough lifeboats, and there weren't enough life vests. And at the very end, the 4 chaplains each took their life vest off, and they gave them to 4 more men so that these men could be saved. And as the lifeboats were leaving behind, and the men were drowning and trying to survive, the 4 last people on the USS Dorchester, February 7th, 1944, were the 4 chaplains. And the story after story told of the final words as the ship went down, of the men yelling out the following, quote unquote, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Right? 27 minutes after the first torpedo struck, the last vestige of the USS Dorchester disappeared beneath the cold North Atlantic waters. In its death throes, it reached out to claim any survivors nearby, taking with it to its final grave all of those left on board and the 4 ministers. And on that day, it says that they made their father very proud. And we're still telling their story, the 4 chaplains. Look it up. It's an amazing story. Google it. We're still telling their story because even though they died, right, they left such inspiration. They left such an example of what is possible for each and every one of us. We need examples like this. We need examples for our children to believe in heroes. We need examples of captains who are willing to go down with the ship. And each and every one of us, in some way, in some fashion, is a captain of our own ship. In our marriages, and with our children, and with our parents, and in all kinds of aspects of our lives when it comes to money and our health and friendships, and we're going to experience loss and betrayals. We will experience all those things. The question is not whether it happens. Ships sink, and we will all experience turbulent seas. The question is, how will we respond? Are we going to respond like the quote-unquote captain this past week, or are we going to respond like the 4 chaplains? Let me end with this. It's called God Give Us Men. God give us men. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whom the lust of office does not kill. Men whom the spoils of office cannot buy. Men who possess opinions at will. Men who have honor. Men who will not lie. Men who can stand before a demigod and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking. Tall men, sun-crowned, who live above the fog, in public duty and private thinking. For while the rabble, with their thumbward creeds, their large professions and their little deeds, mingle in selfish strife, freedom weeps, wrong rules the land, and waiting justice sleep. God give us real men. God give us real women. God give us real captains who can remind us of our true purpose here on earth, to achieve nobility of the soul. And with that, we'll enter into the Ruach rally. We'll bring in all those children, and we will be examples of what's possible. We will exemplify courage and honor and duty and nobility.